reading some time ago some work by an anthropologist, and he was saying that there is evidence that the belief of life going on has been around. Human beings in some way, shape, or form have been around about 200,000 years, and for an awful lot of that, there's been this belief that when this lifespan comes to an end, that is not the end. And so his question, his scientific question was, why would this be hardwired into our brains? And I think that's really interesting. So interesting way. So that's why we use the word transition. So we honor you on your journey. In talking about spiritual truths, I think maybe we all have our standards at some level, a way of measuring, a way of measuring what seems to be true. And I'm an enthusiast for psychology. I'm not saying I'm by any means the greatest expert in it, but I think that I've had a relationship with psychology, kind of like a blue-collar journeyman relationship with it. I've always worked in programs, and I've worked in corrections. I've worked around recovery. I've done a lot of work myself and on me, and then I've had the pleasure of standing by when people are working on issues in their lives. I love the term psycho-spirituality, the joining together of psychology and spirituality. So for me, one of the measurement tools that I use around spiritual concepts is, are they psychologically sound? And I want to start today by talking about the word evolution. And of course, we think of it in terms of the physical world and that whole process that took place for millions of years. And then there's another type of evolution that I think we can all relate to in terms of the evolution of our lives. And the reason I think that we are able to grab a hold of that so readily is because there's a theory in psychology called stages of human development. And basically, it starts from the time we come into this world all the way up to the very, when we make our transition. And all along the way, there are all kinds of stages of human development. And so a couple of the ones on the hit parade that we're all aware of, have you ever heard of the terrible twos, right? So that's a stage of human development. That's when a child is beginning to break away from parents and get into a little bit of independence, sometimes too much independence too quickly. So we're chasing them around the house, trying to keep them out of the dog food and things like that. Then we've all heard of the midlife crisis, which I think is a midlife opportunity, right? Which means that it's time to go into another direction. So maybe there's a way in which we have pushed our life into a direction that is coming to a close. Children are moving away. Maybe a job changes or a job ends, and so you don't have to go drive. You don't have to go end your marriage and buy a Corvette. That's the crisis. It's an opportunity to do something greater. And then we think of the stages of change of being the child and being the adolescent and being the adult and then being the elder and so forth and so on. So there's these ideas of human development. And so the idea of evolution seems to fit for us. In other words, we think about school. We think of first grade, second grade, third grade, and so on. We don't take a kid, from first grade and then throw them into high school. Oh, you graduated first grade. Now you're a freshman in high school. We understand that there are steps to get there. So evolution is a part of spirituality. It exists on all levels of religion. Call it transformation, call it salvation, call it a journey, call it a pilgrimage, call it whatever you want to call it. It exists in all kinds of religions. And so our founder, Ernest Holmes, has a definition of evolution that I want to share with you. And again, Ernest Holmes was someone who looked at spiritual ideas and concepts and distilled them down into a conversation to be able to to be workable, because sometimes religion is so thick and flowery and so esoteric and so poetic. I mean, the writings and ideas of religions are gorgeous, but sometimes they're hard to deal with. And so Holmes, he wrote in a very gorgeous way himself, but I mean, this idea of bringing them down to where we can have a conversation. So Ernest Holmes says, evolution is the coming forth of spirit. Okay, evolution is the coming forth of spirit. Since the idea of that is an unfolding state, it appears as though we live in an imperfect universe. Evolution is the time and process through which an idea, wisdom, healing, transformation, insight, fruition, unfolds to a higher state of manifestation, and thus evolution will go on forever. I love that, because when I was exposed to other religions that will remain nameless, sometimes the idea was you live your life and you hopefully do what you're supposed to do, so that you either get to go upstairs to the party so you can avoid downstairs to the people who have to do the work of the party, right? And I didn't really like either one of those options, because the idea of, say, heaven, it's like that sounds really good, streets of gold and all kinds of stuff, and it sounds like a really great amusement park. But I wasn't sure. I after a while, what would I be doing? I mean, I was like, okay, I've been here, I've done all the rides, I've talked to the angels and stuff, hung out with all the great teachers, but now what? It's like there was something in me that wanted to be stimulated, something in me that wanted to move on and grow, right? And I have a hard time believing that we de facto go into a place of condemnation and damnation, because I don't know how many of you have ever been present for the birth of a child, but I don't see any original sin there. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, and we're beautiful. As human beings, we're absolutely gorgeous. And how do you just throw that away? So it never made sense to me. So the idea of evolution, the idea of moving forward in some way. In other words, I know that we fall short, and I know that we go into some gray areas, and I know that we create challenges and we find ourselves in challenges. But the fact of the matter is that 99% of the time, once we get to the other side of a challenge, most people say, oh my God, I learned so much from that. That was amazing. It was really tough when I went through it, but I'm a different person today. I have a different outlook. That's been my experience, in terms of the human condition. I think there's got to be something to that. There's got to be something to this idea of moving beyond, moving through, healing, whatever that is. I think the trick spiritually is the idea to look for what Holmes is talking about. To say, okay, the world does feel imperfect. I think everyone is in this room, if I said, do you think the world has an imperfect feeling to it? We say, yeah, well, yeah, that's kind of obvious, right? But Holmes is saying, wait a minute, there's a greater thing here. There's spirit. There's a larger picture. It's what, in terms of the people I work with, we do, at some point we have to get into dealing with the issues that are right in front of them. But then there's also this idea of intention and faith and hope, which is really beautiful. Who do you want to become? Who do you think you really are? Who do you think is down there underneath whatever the darkness might be, that you can emerge? Who is that person? I think the trick then is for us, in terms of, if we want to be spiritually aware, is to look forward from that place, to look out onto the world from the standpoint of what is the possibility and what is the potential. So I've been thinking about, we're in the Christmas season. I want to go down to that nativity scene. We look at the nativity scene, right? We have all those different little figures. We have Mary, we have Joseph, we have the animals, we have the baby there, and we have what's called the wise ones, and we have the shepherds, and we have a We have an angel who's kind of sitting up on top looking at the whole thing. And I want us to zero in on those people there that were considered, they were called the wise men, but I want to think of them as the wise ones, the magi, the seekers. It says they come from the east, right? I want to think about them for a moment. And so what we know in terms of the folklore, the story, is that what they did was, one night they saw a star. So I want to go back a couple clicks before that. I want to remind us that they were looking for the star. In other words, wherever they were, and the nice thing about these stories is, whip up whatever your imagination gives you. Create the movie in your mind, the setting, the sets, everything. Because in spirituality, we have that ability to do that, to understand the metaphors, understand the archetypes, to bring it into our own lives, to have it presented in any way we want to. I mean, when I was in ministerial training, one of my favorite things was we took a look at biblical stories and we say, okay, what does this look like if it's your story? And sometimes if there were different people, we would come in and we would become each person. Try that with David and Goliath. We all want to be David, right? Try being Goliath. I remember I had to write a paper about that. Andy is Goliath. That's no good. Goliath wasn't cute. He wasn't, so I had to take that on. So I like to imagine that temple, wherever it was, and the wise ones at night gathered by the window looking out. We ain't going to see it if we're not looking for it. So I want to ask myself a question. Why were they looking for it? There was probably some kind of a challenge. Probably things weren't going so well for them. And so they're looking for something different. They're looking for a sign. They're living a challenging life. And so they see it. And so they begin to move towards that. When I think about that, and we are in this season of Christmas where as you drive around town, you see all the lights, and I'm sure a lot of you have lights in your own homes and your yards and everything. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And the tree that's out in the foyer today that's all lit up. And so it's winter time. And in here where we live, we don't really feel the heavy impacts of some winters on Earth. We live in we don't live in a place where there's actual darkness all the time, like some places in the Earth, towards the Arctic and stuff, where a lot of our ancestors were. Imagine what light meant to them. And I'm talking about ancestrally. Imagine you're in a museum of natural history and you come across a display of ancient people from the north, and they're in some kind of a little diorama. And that diorama is very dark. They've got the clothing that they wore there, and they've got their dwelling. And if you look at them, if you look at those figures, you think, wow, what are you thinking? What are you experiencing? What's going on for you? And what we know is that the winter for them was a very challenging time. I mean, sometimes people made their transitions in the winter. Sometimes the food went bad, whatever. When they looked to the star, when they looked to their stars, what were they looking for? Looking for light. They were looking for the sun. They were looking for that time when they could stand once again in the sun and feel the warmth on their face and know that now they were back into a season of growth and transformation. That's what the wise ones were looking for. They were looking for faith. They were looking for hope. And they were looking for a way to the sun. So we have sun, S-U-N, and according to the biblical narrative, we have sun, S-O-N. And so they were looking for the evidence of spirit. Ernest Holmes says, spirit is always there, but do we always feel it? Do we always see it? And so I like to think about them getting on whatever mode of transportation they had and traveling long distances to say, we need some help. We're in the midst of something. We need some inspiration. We need to know that Spirit is there. We need to know that the sun is rising. We need to know that there's something out there that will deeply confirm within us this presence of Spirit. I remember there was a time in my life, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Eagle Lake, the one that's above Susanville. Lots of Eagle Lakes around. It's a really popular name for lakes. There's one above Susanville. And in the summertime, you go up there, and at nighttime, it is cold up there. You know what I'm saying? And so now this is over 30 years ago, during a time in my life where I was in a very challenging time in my life, for about 2 or 3 summers, I would go up there for about a week, and I would fish with a gentleman, and I was fishing back in those days. I was never very good at it, and most of the time I really didn't want to catch a fish. I just wanted to be away and get away from my issues and problems. There was a gentleman I knew who was a very stoic and quiet person, and it was challenging because I'm a chatty person. I'm a talkative person. And in fact, there have been times in my life where if someone wasn't talking, I would just fill the air with noise because it would make me nervous, you know. But this guy was very quiet, and he had a presence to where, you know, I didn't really want to do too much chatting, you know, out on a boat with him. And so I would fish with him, and I would spend some time at his cabin, and he'd wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so then we would get ready and go down and get on the boat and go out. He wanted to be in the middle of the lake before the sun came up. And so in my mind, the wise ones in the Christmas story, it's like early morning, you know, it's dark. I remember my life was chaotic a lot because I had a lot of chaos in my head, a lot of monkeys up there. I don't mean to be dualistic about that. They were my monkeys, but they weren't housebroken, you know? And I had a lot of loose ends, and stuff wasn't working and all that sort of thing. And I remember that after a couple trips with this gentleman, I actually embraced that quiet in that absolutely gorgeous blanket of stars that I sat out in that boat, hoping that I wouldn't get a fish. And there was a calm that came over me. There was a silencing. And within that calm and silence, and the monkeys calming down and the chaos going away, there were some ideas that began to formulate over a couple of summers of what it would be like to move forward. And for me, faith is like, oh my God, I could do that. I could figure that out. I could figure out how to get somewhere from A to B to C. I don't know how many of you found in your own lives that in some of the really big issues in your life, it takes time. And it becomes the stages of change. It becomes the evolution. And pretty soon the pieces start to drop in. And you hear the right person, you read the right book, you go to the right place, but it begins with the right thinking, maybe. Healthier thinking out under the stars. So I remember sitting there in that lake, so deathly cold, and to the east there was some sort of mountain range, and eventually you'd begin to see on that mountain range the rim of light, just little line of light up there. And then it would move into a halo. And I remember turning my face to the sun and feeling that warmth and being able to embrace what I would now call an intentional feeling of the presence of Spirit. For me, it was change. It was, I don't have to live this way. It was a new direction. There's a gentleman who I think you guys are aware of me quoting from time to time, and I am trying to find him here. His name is, I got it. His name is John Lee. He's a spiritual writer. And he said, "In the still, dark morning, I feel the loving quiet of the higher expression coming forth. The peace one feels from a deep connection from within, from a place perfect in silence and in love, the very foundation of evolution, the foundation of faith." So I want to end today, and I need to again, this is, I'm in a situation today where I need to be a little bit more creative than normal because we don't have our projector. And so I found a video this week, Here Comes the Sun. We all know that song. We love that song. It's sung by a couple guys, and they are singing in Dubai. They're out in the desert. It's one, I don't know if you guys see a lot of that on YouTube now, a lot of musicians out somewhere, and they'll be, it became popular after the pandemic when people were filming in all these places, and it's kind of continued on. So there's two gentlemen out there singing this, and they're in that desert of the Middle East. There's nothing quite like, I've never been to the Middle East, but I mean, you see a picture and wow, that's the Middle East. It's a certain kind of desert, right? And they're on this mountain. Now, I want us to think for a moment right now. Middle East today. Is that a place that we are struggling to see evolution? Right? And that's what I loved about this video. So I want you to come up with, in your mind, think of a Middle East desert and a couple of kind of young, folky kind of singers with their guitars singing Here Comes the Sun. Go ahead.